Today I'm analysing Macbeth, the Scottish play. So when I read reviews of this play, I found them slightly lacking. They talked about it being a play which explores masculinity and how it's Shakespeare's most misogynistic play. And while this does clearly explore masculinity, I don't think it's Shakespeare's most misogynistic play. I think in fact to make that point you kind of have to overlook this giant elephant of the room. So we know in the intro scene, just to get started, we know in the introductory scene, which is the most important in storytelling, that we have three witches. That's what we see to begin with. And the introductory scene in a story is often establishing the theme for the rest of the story. And so I think the introductory scene in Harry Potter is Dumbledore and McGonagall dropping off Harry to the Dursleys. It's not Harry at the Dursleys, because that's not really what's happening for the rest of the show. It's kind of a hint of what's to come. It's establishing something. Sometimes the introductory scene is establishing the difference between the beginning and the end of the movie, like they kind of are. They're yin and yang sometimes. But in this context, it's sort of a reference to Greek tragedies, I guess, where these fates, where fates are always, it always comes true. Like in Oedipus, there's this story of, Oedipus is obviously the story where a king is told by a fortune teller that, not a fortune teller, but So today I'm analysing Macbeth, the Scottish play. When I looked up some analyses of this play, I found them to be somewhat lacking. They talked about it being Shakespeare's most misogynistic play, which I really don't agree with. It definitely explores themes of masculinity and sort of toxic masculinity at that. But I just didn't see it as misogynistic. In fact, I think to get to that point of view, you'd have to really overlook a giant elephant in the room. So just to start off this analysis, let's look at the introductory scene, which, as we all know, is kind of the most important scene in a play, in a story, even in a movie, like in Harry Potter. It starts off with Dumbledore and McGonagall dropping Harry off at the Dursleys. So sometimes an introductory story can an introductory scene can kind of tell the difference between the beginning and the end. So sometimes there's a yin and yang, the hero starts off with this terrible situation and ends up with a wonderful situation or something along those lines. But in this story, it's kind of referencing Greek tragedies, you could say. We know in Oedipus that Oedipus is, his father is this great king, and it is foretold that his son will kill him and marry his mother, and so he sends the son off far away, and eventually he's raised by, I think, farmer, and he comes back and kills his father, marries his mother, kills his father in an accident, marries his mother without realizing it. So there's this sort of idea in Greek tragedies that fate will always get its due. Fate will always come to pass. And maybe that's just a way of kind of dealing with the realities of life, the harshness of life. If you come into this great tragedy, if someone you love dies, maybe you if you have this worldview that it was fated to happen and that nothing could have changed, maybe that's how you console yourself. And maybe that's a good way to look at things, really. But anyway, back to Shakespeare. We have this opening scene of these three witches. And if this was a play all about toxic masculinity and the masculine, we probably wouldn't see three witches that are kind of the archetype of evil femininity. Nothing screams masculine to me when I think of witches. It's not three lion tamers or three hitmen out to kill Macbeth. It's three evil women. That's kind of the theme of this. And Banquo, to be fair, he says, there's a lot of androgyny in this play. He says something along the lines of, "Are you women? I can't tell because you have beards." So obviously there's this kind of mixing up of the genders that we see throughout the play. But I would almost see that as kind of the witches have repressed the positive feminine aspects of themselves. Exteriorly they've they've taken away their youthful glow and the positive the nurturingness of themselves in exchange for these powers, perhaps. But in any case, they kind of lack any sort of elements of positive femininity. It's all quite negative. And femininity is interesting because I think it's kind of hard to pin down, is how I've seen it. Masculinity, evil masculinity is fairly easy to understand. It's something like, I will go to that neighboring village and conquer them and rape and pillage. Like it hits you in the face. Like when you have a conflict with a man, two men in conflict, at least in the past, I mean, they would hit each other in the face. And conflict with the women is different though. Women often they are often, I guess in the past, they used to be, and I think so still to this day, we are kind of more interested in the social aspects of things and the social nuances. Like there's this kind of meme where you ask your boyfriend like, oh, you talk to your friend, Chuck, how's his girlfriend Beth? And then your boyfriend's like, I don't know. And you're like, how did you not ask that question? And he's like, I didn't even ask Chuck how his day, how he was going. Like, why would I ask about his girlfriend? But women are so interested in things. Another kind of point of view here is that I was talking to my boyfriend Elliot, and he said that in order to hang out with a guy, you have to go ask him if he wants to do something. Like, you have to be like, oh, I want to discuss this financial idea with you, or I want to build a table with you, right? Whereas with women, we're just like, oh, can I call you up? I have some feelings to talk about. Like, that's kind of, the dynamic is different, which is also why I think maybe therapy doesn't work for men as well sometimes, because oftentimes men bond by doing things together, joining a soccer team or playing video games together, or, getting together with your friends to bash up the other guys. Like there's this kind of pack bonding that men have that I think therapy doesn't really play into very well. Anyway, so back to that's kind of just my idea of the gender differences. But these witches, their influence isn't really masculine. It's even though they have these kind of masculine features in a way, they're more androgynous. Like they aren't going out and hurting people. They're not telling Macbeth that he's gonna die and then killing him themselves. They're at one point there's a sailor's wife who has these chestnuts, and one of the witches says, "Can I have some chestnuts?" And the sailor's wife says, "No, fuck off." And then the witch says, "That's what Shakespeare wrote, by the way. He wrote fuck off." And then the witch says, "Well, then I'm gonna go across the sea and find your husband and torture him and I think kill him." And it does kind of speak to this feminine presence. Like, women get revenge on you by spreading rumors, by changing your social status in ways that oftentimes you can't quite connect to them even. Like, if a rumor spreads, you don't really know where it came from. Women can have this mysterious thing going on. Like, women oftentimes to get revenge will get inside someone's head for years, and I mean we can do awful things. We can demean people and kind of undermine them in ways that I think men aren't inclined to do as much. Men are much more inclined to have these oftentimes violent outbursts or yelling matches or whatever. Whereas as women, kind of we have more of a mysterious, you could call it mysterious, way about us. And there's this other association with women and mysteriousness. I think just kind of getting into my own personal experiences, like I have found that my intuition is quite strong, and perhaps it's because like we aren't as strong as men, right? And so if I'm half as strong as men, maybe I have to be able to use my intuition to figure out whether a situation is safe or not. I mean, maybe I have to immediately know what to do in certain situations to get out. And so I think women do have this kind of connection to the witchy, to the ethereal, because we sometimes know things that we don't really have a reason to know. One time, an aunt of mine, she knew that she had this relative, and she was super early days pregnant, but like my aunt knew that she was pregnant somehow. I mean, she was probably a month or two in. It was like she wasn't showing at all, and somehow she just knew. So I think women oftentimes have this intuition that we can choose to cultivate or not. But I think that's why there's this association with witchiness in women that it isn't really associated with men at all. But anyway, so let's look at Macbeth for a second. He's this powerful warrior, and that's when we first see him. We first hear about and talked about when a messenger comes back and he tells King Duncan that Macbeth has come back and he's slain one army that they thought he was going to lose against, and then when he's won against that army, another army comes and attacks them with fresh men, and they fight twice as hard, and they beat both armies. And so immediately we see Macbeth as this valiant warrior. He's got this very well-developed masculine, clearly. And obviously, as you know, if you're listening to this, I assume you know, I'm not going to tell you the whole fucking plot, you can do it yourself. But we know that Lady Macbeth, the first time we see her, she's reading this letter from Macbeth saying that he's been told by the witches that he's going to be the king, and they were right about predicting he was going to be the Thane of Cawdor, even though that couldn't have been known. And so immediately she understands that she kind of knows that Macbeth has been fed he's too full of the milk of human kindness, which is kind of this like metaphor of motherhood almost. Like he's, fed the milk, it's like a baby is fed milk. And right after that, she kind of realizes that she needs to push Macbeth and manipulate him. She says, pour my spirits into his ear, I think. Lady Macbeth is constantly kind of wishing she didn't have her masculine element. She's actively suppressing them. And Lady Macbeth is constantly kind of wishing she didn't have her femininity. It seems like she feels like it's a curse of some sort. She says, unsex me at some point, like take my gender away. And she says something about her breast milk. She says something like take my breasts and let the milk become gall. Like poison is what gall is. So she's built this beautiful imagery of breast milk, the most nurturing thing you can give to a child, to a baby, and letting it turn to poison. She's literally creating this metaphor of toxic femininity. Like he's almost spelling it out for you. This is in part a play about toxic femininity, and I think her representation of that is really beautiful. At some point she says that she would, bash her own baby's brains out to get what she wanted, to achieve her goals. So she's really, in a way, like rejecting every essence of positive femininity in her, but it doesn't go away, as we all know. Again, she isn't quite masculine because she doesn't kill those men. She never kills anyone, but once Macbeth kills Duncan, she takes the knives, she bloodies them, and she puts them on the guards. And so Lady Macbeth kind of has this brilliant cunning about her where she's kind of manipulating the situation to get what she wants. But she's not actually killing anyone. There's this great scene where Macbeth he's seeing Banquo's ghost at this feast with all these nobles around. It's this great feast. And then he sees the ghost and he starts to like go mad, and she's like kind of protecting him and kind of keeping the situation together, and she's keeping the social graces. She's protecting his image as she sees fit. So she still has this very feminine idea. She still has this very feminine archetype about her. It's just this like dark manipulativeness for her own gain. And you don't need to see this play as typically about the relationship between men and women. I mean, you could also see this play like Jung might describe it as quite a dream-like play. These plays, these things that stick in our heads for thousands of years, and I mean only 400 years in Shakespeare's case, but they're there because they get to something deeper in us. They kind of hit us in where our dreams live, I would say, where our deepest kind of desires and understandings live. And so when you bring ideology in these modern contexts, I mean, I'm not going to convince anyone, I know, but it doesn't, I don't think it necessarily makes sense when you talk about androgyny as we see it today, and all that. But anyway, Jung kind of talked about how if you have a dream and you're dreaming about another person, almost all the time you're actually dreaming about yourself and an aspect of yourself that is represented by that person. And you could see Macbeth as that. You could see Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as one person. You could see them as, let's just take a man in this case, but it could be a woman too. You could see the example of a man when he has this fully overdeveloped masculine, and then he's kind of suppressing his kindness, his milk of human kindness. I mean, today that might look like a CEO of an oil company who only cares about profits, or like a tobacco company or something, where he knows that people are dying of cancer, but he really just wants to make that extra dollar, you know. And somebody with a well-developed feminine might be someone who also makes a lot of money and is doing well, but it doesn't have to be money either. Maybe they're just really into their research or whatever, their thing. But they're also fostering their community. They're also maybe donating to local organizations. They have a great family. Like that's what you can, no matter what the gender somebody is, a well-developed masculine and feminine kind of play together to make somebody who is both successful in life in whatever endeavor they choose, and also growing the people around them and nurturing and fostering. I think the feminine, the archetypal feminine is really well embodied by, I know this lady who's kind of a matriarch. She's actually a kind of a distant relative of mine, and her sons were having this argument. And I got to see her matriarch status really play out, because her sons owned a business together and two of them were fighting, and so one of them comes to her and talks to her, and she says, you know, she talks to him for like an hour, and then at the end, he was just like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to go back to my brother, I'm going to apologize, I'm going to sort things out. And she isn't like telling them what to do. She isn't like controlling things from behind the scenes or like forcing them to do anything. She's just kind of helping her community integrate. That is femininity. I think that is the beauty of femininity. And so you can see Macbeth as just like the interplay with one's ambition versus their feminine, their conscience, I should say, in a different level. And that's what's so great about Shakespeare and all these archetypal ideas. They really can be analyzed at so many different layers. Like you can see them from your own personal perspective. You can see them from the perspective of a parent if you're a parent, or you can see them from as a metaphor for how the world works as well. There's really no shortage of layers in these plays if you really want to go into it. That's what makes them stand the test of time. And that's why, like, when you see a lot of modern day music and movies and drama, it doesn't stand the test of time, because sometimes they're just trying to tell you a message. Like, if there's a song about like body image or whatever, you know, something political, like, it's only one message, and actually the artist isn't conveying something deep inside of them that is dreamlike. Instead, they're conveying this idea that they want to convert you to. It's not, even if it's a good idea, like it's not multi-layered. It doesn't appeal to many people. It's just trying to convert people to your ideology, which, I mean, whether or not you agree with it, it's like it's not true art. It won't stand the test of time, in my opinion. But from a relationship standpoint, you can see that Macbeth kind of makes a lot of sense. Like, you could see Macbeth as someone who has an underdeveloped feminine. And so I think in a lot of ways, and probably in Shakespeare's time even more, like, we had this idea that women were kind of oppressed, and they were told to be, you know, almost like children, like seen and not heard, and all these kind of ideas. But I think women probably used to act as the moral compass a lot of times for men. And sure, they didn't get any formal power, but I think oftentimes women civilize men. There's a story of Enki. He's this wild man, and he goes out and he lives and he talks to the animals, and society kind of is sort of a terror on society. So his friend, he gets him a prostitute, and so he sleeps with this prostitute for a week, and then he realizes that he can't talk to animals anymore, so he joins society. And that's the Beauty and the Beast myth too. It's this idea that women civilize men. It is sort of our job to take this wild single dangerous man, because single men are dangerous. I mean, single men are like the vast majority of like terrorists and things like that. They're literally the most dangerous thing to society, and we provide them with stability and sex and nurturing and all these wonderful qualities. And we point them, maybe we don't point them in a direction, but we certainly help foster whatever positive qualities are going on. Men follow women into almost anything. I mean, you wonder why like fashion is such a female-dominated industry. It's because women kind of create the culture, and then men adapt to fashions because they think women will like the fashion and women will be more attracted to them. I mean, it's just, this is life. This is kind of how life works, I think. So yeah, you could think of Lady Macbeth as kind of, from a personal point of view, I know that when I am perhaps not in doing my best, I will be a little bit more controlling of my partner. I will try to tell him what to do, even if I know that it's not befitting of his intuition isn't telling him to do something. I might go and tell him to do because I think I know best. And Lady Macbeth is sort of doing this, but in a blown up kind of terrible way. If she's by herself, she kind of collapses into insanity. But when she's with Macbeth, she's manipulative and attacking him and telling him what to do. And there's this sort of idea of like, perhaps a mentally unstable woman, perhaps part of one of the signs of that might be that you are overly controlling of your man. And that's just my point of view. I mean, maybe not. Like, I also come from sort of maybe a more traditional relationship style, that's what works best for me. So, you know, maybe it doesn't work for you. Maybe you want to be super controlling and maybe that works for you. Or maybe you just want to maybe think the woman should be in charge, and that's fine too. I mean, you know, that's life. We all have different paths that we must take. But if you're a traditional woman, I think maybe Lady Macbeth can teach you a lot about being controlling. And on a world stage too, like, I think femininity is I just think that we've been lied to a lot about femininity. I think that growing up, I feel like I was sort of fed this idea of women being femininity being somehow weak, because in a capitalist society, femininity doesn't produce a product. Being a woman, being nurturing, raising children doesn't make you money, and so we've been raised with this capitalist notion that being a housewife is somewhat lesser. Whereas I think, and even being a housewife was disempowering, which it was to some extent. But if you think about housewives back then, they weren't doing nothing. They weren't just trapped at home cooking all the time. I mean, they went out and talked to other housewives. Like, they were socializing. They were playing these social games, and they were bringing communities together more than anything. They were talking to the people around them and getting to know their neighbors and figuring out which kids were good and which kids, you know, their kids shouldn't hang around with so much. Like, and so I think in a lot of ways with these culture wars, with these we have with this great divide, I think part of that is because women don't get the chance to express their natural femininity in bringing communities together. We have all this masculinity, we have all this fighting, all this terror, but we don't have the forgiveness and the empathy. You might think of yourself as useless or not producing, but I urge you to think about the impact that you have on the people around you and to focus on that. Maybe you have friends that seem to grow around you, or maybe you're helping put your family back together, or maybe you're just helping people you know understand and come to terms with their trauma. Maybe you're babysitting kids. Like, there's so many wonderful things that you might be doing, and just because you're not making money doesn't mean you don't have power or value in this society. Personally, I think that we are a nation. America is kind of a nation of people who are at war culturally. I mean, that is the idea of the culture war. And I do worry about where a culture war might go. Right now it's kind of ideological in our heads, but I worry that it might become more physical in the future. And I really think that maybe reclaiming our femininity as both men and women might be the way to solve this. Maybe if we can get to know our neighbors better and really talk to the people around us, and maybe think about, even if somebody's saying crazy shit online that we don't agree with, maybe think about like where that comes from them. Does it come from a place of trauma? And maybe not try to get all, there's this masculine idea of, I think, of being all intellectual and arguing with all these points and citing statistics. And although your statistics might be right, like it's not converting people, what might help is if we talk to people like they're humans and try to connect with them on a human level and really try to empathize about our situations and kind of bring back this great divine spirit of femininity that I think we are missing. So, if you listened this far, thank you. That was quite a longer ramble than I was expecting it to be. But I think I'm happy with it. Have a good day.